You don't belong here. Leave now.
The ballroom was everything money could buy. Crystal chandeliers dripping light over 200 people in silk and diamonds. Waiters gliding between them like ghosts, silver trays balanced on white-gloved hands. The scent of champagne and expensive perfume filling the air like something out of a dream. Laura stood at the edge of it all in a simple navy dress she'd worn twice before. No jewelry except the small gold ring on her left hand. No designer bag. No status. At least, that's what everyone who looked at her decided in the first 3 seconds. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not according to her husband. Nathan Hart found her by the entrance before she'd even crossed the marble threshold, and the look on his face wasn't surprise. It was something colder than that. Something rehearsed. Laura. His voice, low and sharp. What are you doing here? You asked me to come, she said quietly. 3 weeks ago. You said it was important. That was before. He glanced over his shoulder, then back at her. Things have changed. Around them, people moved and laughed and clinked glasses. No one was watching yet. But Nathan's jaw was tight, his eyes already calculating something Laura couldn't see. Nathan, you don't belong here. The words came out flat. Final. Like a verdict. These are my colleagues. My people. This is my world, Laura. Not yours. She felt it then. That particular silence that falls inside a person before they realize something has been broken permanently. Your world, she repeated. And then he turned, and he raised his voice, and the first few heads turned their way. Sabrina. He waved toward a woman in a red dress who had been standing 15 feet away, watching with a smile that had been waiting for its moment. She walked toward them like she owned the floor, and maybe, in every way that mattered to Nathan Hart, she did. This is Sabrina Collins, Nathan announced, loud enough for a circle of colleagues to hear. She is exactly where she belongs tonight. He looked back at Laura. His eyes were empty. You, on the other hand. He turned to the nearest security guard. Can you please escort my wife to the exit? She was just leaving. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was worse than that. It was the sound of 200 people trying not to look, and looking anyway. Laura stood completely still. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't water. She simply looked at the man she had loved for 6 years, and she saw, clearly, and without confusion for the first time, exactly who he was. The security guard stepped forward, apologetic, uncomfortable, and Laura turned to walk toward the door. Nobody there. Not Nathan, not Sabrina, not a single person in that glittering room, realized what was about to walk back through those same doors. To understand what happened that night, you have to go back 23 years. You have to go back to a girl named Laura Blackwood, 17 years old, sitting at a kitchen table in a 3-room apartment in Baltimore, watching her mother count the week's money by the glow of a lamp with a broken shade. Her mother's hands were rough from the laundry work. Her nails were always short. But she counted those bills with a kind of dignity that Laura never forgot. Slowly, carefully, like each dollar was something she'd earned with her whole body, because she had. Mama, Laura said that night, I'm going to build something. Her mother didn't look up from the money. I know you are, baby. Something real. Her mother set the bills down and looked at her daughter. This serious, quiet girl who had always been more careful with her words than other children, who read everything she could get her hands on, who stayed after school to ask teachers questions that made them pause before answering. Your grandmother always said you had her eyes, her mother told her. Said you could see around corners. Laura's grandmother, Eleanor Blackwood, a woman who had started a cleaning company with a mop and a telephone in 1971 and turned it into a regional enterprise before she retired. A woman who had given Laura 3 things when she was 12 years old: a leather journal, a book on financial markets, and 2 words she repeated every time Laura doubted herself. Stay hidden. What does that mean? Laura had asked. Her grandmother had smiled. The kind of smile that carries a whole life behind it. It means the world will try to put a price tag on you before you've had a chance to show them your value. Don't let them. Stay hidden until it's time. Then let them see everything at once. Laura never forgot those words. She earned a scholarship to Howard University, studied finance and business law, worked 3 part-time jobs, sent money home to her mother, graduated at the top of her class, and spent the next decade doing things quietly that most people do loudly. By the time she was 32, Blackwood Capital was a private investment firm managing assets that would have made people in that Baltimore apartment faint. She had positions in healthcare, technology, real estate, and emerging markets. She hired a small, loyal team who understood that discretion was not optional. It was the foundation. She did not appear on Forbes lists. She did not attend industry galas with her name on the program. She sat in rooms where decisions were made, and she made them, and then she left, and almost no one knew she'd been there. She had built exactly what she promised her mother. Something real. But here is what the money never fixed. The place inside her that still needed to be loved for the woman she was underneath all of it. That place was still 17 years old, sitting at that kitchen table, hoping to be seen. That place was what Nathan Hart found. She met him at a charity event she'd attended quietly, without her name on anything. He was 34, tall, warm-voiced, charming in a way that felt unperformed. He spilled wine on her sleeve and apologized so genuinely that she laughed. They talked for 2 hours standing in the corner of a room full of people neither of them was paying attention to. He was a senior manager at Crestmont Technologies. What he didn't know, what she did not tell him, for reasons her grandmother would have understood immediately, was that Blackwood Capital held 61% of Crestmont Technologies shares, that she had been part of the original investment group that funded the company 12 years earlier, that the building where Nathan spent 40 hours a week was, in every legal sense, hers. She told herself she would tell him eventually. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment. But the real reason, the one she admitted only to herself in the quiet hours, was that she needed to know he loved Laura first. Just Laura. The woman with the soft voice and the 2 practical shoes and the habit of underlining passages in books. Not the portfolio. Not the shares. Not the foundation named after her grandmother. Just her. For 2 years, it felt like that was exactly what he'd found. He called her every day when he traveled. He remembered small things, the way she liked her coffee, the name of her college roommate, the anniversary of her mother's passing. He was patient with her silences. He made her laugh. He proposed on an ordinary Tuesday in the kitchen of her deliberately modest townhouse, with a ring that was beautiful but not excessive, and she said yes before he'd finished the sentence. She thought she'd finally done it. She thought she'd found the version of her life her grandmother couldn't have, love completely untangled from money. She thought wrong. The changes began so gradually she almost missed them. 18 months into the marriage, Nathan made senior vice president at Crestmont. The promotion was legitimate. He was talented, driven, good at his work. But something shifted with the title. Small things at first. The way he started arriving at parties before her and leaving without checking if she was ready. The way he began describing his colleagues with a kind of reverence that had nothing to do with their character. The way he started spending more time with Sabrina Collins, the executive director of strategic partnerships, whose name appeared in his sentences the way important names do when someone is trying to make them sound casual. Laura noticed. She also noticed the receipts, not because she was searching, but because she managed finances for a living and certain patterns were simply impossible for her not to see. Hotel charges that didn't match his travel schedule. A bracelet purchased in Milan that she never received. She noticed, and she said nothing, because some part of her was still waiting to be wrong. But she wasn't wrong. 3 months before the gala, she had a quiet conversation with Oliver Reed, her attorney of 14 years, and one of the 3 people on Earth who knew the full picture of her financial life. "I want to know everything about Sabrina Collins," she told him. Oliver, who had the expression of a man who had seen everything and was still occasionally surprised, nodded slowly. "Everything," she repeated. "Give me 2 weeks," he said. What he found took only 10 days. And it was worse than Laura had anticipated. Because Sabrina Collins wasn't just having an affair with Laura's husband. She was also the silent architect of something much larger and much darker. Working alongside Crestmont's chief financial officer, a man named Damian Wolf, who had been systematically emptying the company's accounts for 4 years through a series of layered shell transactions so carefully constructed that 3 separate auditing firms had missed them. $47 million. Gone. And Sabrina had been helping him hide it. Oliver laid the evidence on Laura's kitchen table, the same simple table where Laura ate breakfast every morning. And they sat across from each other in the quiet of that ordinary room. And Laura looked at it all for a long time without speaking. "When do you want to move?" Oliver asked. She thought about her grandmother. "Stay hidden until it's time." "Not yet," she said. "I'll know when." She knew the moment Nathan raised his voice at her in that ballroom. She knew when she felt the security guard's uncertain hand near her elbow. She knew when she saw the way Sabrina watched her leave. Not with guilt, not with conflict, but with the satisfied calm of someone who believed they had won something they deserved. Laura walked toward the door. She walked slowly, and then she stopped. Not because she was afraid, not because she'd changed her mind, because the grand ballroom doors opened from outside, and Margaret Sinclair walked in. Margaret Sinclair was 71 years old and had chaired the board of Crestmont Technologies for 9 years. She was the kind of woman who entered rooms and made them rearrange themselves around her, not through noise, but through gravity. Silver-haired, black-gowned, carrying the particular stillness of someone who has outlasted every storm ever thrown at her. Beside her walked Oliver Reed, 3 members of Crestmont's senior board, 2 corporate attorneys carrying leather briefcases, and 4 people in dark suits whose identities would become clear very shortly. Margaret crossed the floor with unhurried purpose. Conversations stopped like lights going out. She walked directly to Laura, and the look on her face was simply respectful, the way genuine respect always looks. Like something that exists without effort. "Ms. Blackwood." Margaret took Laura's hand in both of hers. "My sincere apologies for the delay. We came as quickly as we could after the documents were filed." The room was so quiet you could hear the ice settling into champagne glasses. Margaret turned, and her voice carried to every corner without her raising it. "For those who may not be aware, I am pleased to formally introduce Laura Blackwood, founder of Blackwood Capital, and the majority controlling shareholder of Crestmont Technologies." She let that sentence land. She did not rush past it. She let it land and settle and do what truth always does in a room full of people who believed something different 5 seconds ago. Nathan Hart stood 15 feet away, a glass of champagne in his hand, and the color left his face the way water leaves a tilted glass, slowly at first, then all at once. Sabrina Collins was perfectly still. The red dress, the practiced smile, both suddenly wrong for the room she now understood she was standing in. Oliver stepped forward then. He opened the first of the 2 briefcases and began to speak in the measured, unhurried cadence of a man who has been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. The 4 people in dark suits were federal financial investigators. They were there for Damian Wolf. And as Oliver laid out the embezzlement scheme, the shell accounts, the falsified audits, the $47 million, the digital trail that Sabrina Collins had helped construct and conceal, the room absorbed it the way a crowd absorbs a shocking verdict. In silence, in stillness, in the particular collective discomfort of people realizing they have been standing in a room with something they didn't see. Damian Wolf was escorted from the ballroom before he had moved 3 steps toward the exit. Sabrina Collins did not resist the attorneys who approached her. She simply stood there in her red dress and said nothing, which was perhaps the first honest thing she had done in 4 years. And Nathan Hart stood in the center of it all and looked at his wife, at Laura, who had not moved from the spot near the door, who had not changed her expression, who had not said a single word. And he understood, in the way understanding sometimes arrives too late to help anyone, everything he had thrown away. Laura looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then she turned and walked out of the ballroom. She didn't look back. But the night wasn't over. Because what Laura didn't yet know, what no one in that room knew, was that Damian Wolf hadn't been working alone at the top. And the person who had originally recruited him wasn't Sabrina Collins. Oliver discovered it 3 days later, buried in financial records beneath the shell accounts. A series of communications pointing to someone Laura had trusted implicitly for years. The name on those communications was Gerald Ashworth. Gerald Ashworth, who sat on Crestmont's board, who had been Laura's mentor during her first decade in finance, who had introduced her to the original Crestmont investment opportunity 15 years ago, and who had, she now understood, spent the past 4 years quietly positioning himself to acquire control of the company once the embezzlement created enough financial damage to force a distressed sale. He had used Damian. He had cultivated Sabrina. He had watched Nathan destroy Laura's standing so that no one would listen to her if she started asking questions. And he had done all of it while calling her my most brilliant protégé at every industry event they attended together. When Oliver placed the evidence on Laura's desk that Thursday afternoon, she sat with it for a long time. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about her mother's hands counting money at that kitchen table. She thought about the girl who had believed, really, truly believed, that if she stayed hidden long enough, the right people would eventually see her. And then she thought about all the young women who worked at Crestmont, the ones building careers, the ones with loans and mortgages and children and plans, the ones who would have been collateral damage if Gerald Ashworth's scheme had succeeded. She picked up the phone and called the U.S. Attorney's Office. The weeks that followed were not dramatic in the way people expect consequence to be. They were quiet, procedural, the grinding machinery of legal accountability, which moves slowly and without spectacle but does, eventually, move. Nathan resigned from Crestmont Technologies before the board could vote on his termination. The formal request came on a Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, his name had been removed from the company directory. His office was being cleared by Tuesday. 6 years of a career, gone with the efficiency of people who had decided that distance from him was in their best professional interest. He called Laura 7 times in the 2 weeks after the gala. She did not answer. He sent 3 letters, handwritten, which she could tell had taken effort. She read them all. She set them aside. Sabrina Collins was placed on administrative leave pending the federal investigation and, within 30 days, left the company. The federal charges would take longer to resolve. The financial world is a small world, and the conversations happening about her were not ones she would recover from professionally. Gerald Ashworth attempted to resign from the board in the days following the revelation. Margaret Sinclair declined to accept his resignation, understanding that a man who resigns before accountability arrives is a man trying to choose the terms of his own consequences. The SEC was already involved. The FBI was already involved. Gerald would have no choice in what came next. He was 70 years old. He had a beautiful home in Georgetown and a reputation he'd spent 40 years constructing. None of it would be enough. And in those quiet weeks, as the legal machinery turned and the investigations expanded and the newspapers ran pieces that Laura did not speak to them for, in all of that, Laura Blackwood did something that surprised even the people who knew her best. She started sleeping better than she had in 3 years. She took 2 weeks off. Completely off, in a way she hadn't allowed herself in longer than she could remember. She went to her mother's grave on a Tuesday morning when the weather was doing that particular October thing, crisp and golden and honest. She brought sunflowers because her mother had loved them with a specificity that never made complete sense and never needed to. She sat on the bench near the grave and talked, the way you talk to people when no one else is watching, without performance, without the careful management of what others think. She talked about Nathan, and how strange it was that she grieved the person she believed he was far more than she grieved what had actually happened. The man who'd called every day from airports, who remembered her roommate's name, who proposed on a Tuesday. She mourned him genuinely. The man who'd raised his voice in that ballroom was someone she'd never really met before. She talked about Gerald, about what it means when a person you trusted not just professionally, but as a model of what integrity looks like turns out to have been a construction all along. Not a person, a position, a strategy. She talked about her grandmother, which she always did when she came here. Stay hidden until it's time. A cardinal landed on the bench beside her and looked at her with the total confidence of a small animal that has never once doubted its right to exist in any given space. Laura smiled at the bird. Yeah, she said softly. I know. She threw herself into the Blackwood Foundation with a totality of focus that her team found almost overwhelming. The foundation had existed quietly for years, funding scholarships, small business grants, financial literacy programs in underserved communities. But Laura had always managed it from a careful distance, protecting its separation from her personal visibility. Now she stepped into it completely. She hired a director of programs, a woman named Denise Washington, 44 years old, former public school principal, who had the particular combination of organizational intelligence and human warmth that this kind of work requires. From their first meeting, Laura knew she'd found someone who understood not just what needed to be built, but why. Together, they expanded the foundation's reach from 4 cities to 11 in 8 months. They launched a program called the Eleanor Blackwood Entrepreneurship Initiative, named for Laura's grandmother, which provided not just capital but mentorship, networks, and the kind of sustained relationship that Laura had always known was the difference between a grant and a genuine opportunity. The first cohort was 22 young women. At their orientation lunch, Laura stood at the front of a conference room in a building she owned, wearing the same kind of quietly practical clothing she had always worn, and looked at 22 faces looking back at her. I'm going to tell you something my grandmother told me, she said, and I want you to carry it. She paused. The world will try to put a price tag on you before you've had a chance to show them your value. Don't let them. Stay hidden until it's time. Then let them see everything at once. One young woman in the second row, 26, natural hair, notebook already half full, looked up with the expression of someone who has just been handed a key to something they'd been locked out of for a long time. Laura smiled at her. Welcome, she said. Let's get to work. For months after the gala, Nathan Hart appeared at her office. He hadn't called ahead, which was either courage or arrogance, and she sat with her assistant's message for a full 60 seconds before deciding to see him. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically. He was the same tall man with the same broad shoulders. But something in him had contracted. The way a person shrinks when the structure they built their confidence on has been removed. She had him shown into the small conference room rather than her office, and she arrived 3 minutes after he'd been seated, which was not an accident. He stood when she entered. Thank you for seeing me, he said. Sit down, Nathan. They sat across from each other, and the silence between them was different from the silence in the ballroom. That silence had been public, performed. This one was private and honest, and had nowhere to hide. He looked at his hands on the table, then at her. I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not because of what happened after. He stopped. Started again. Not because of the consequences. I need you to know I'm sorry for what I did to you in that room. What I said. The way I said it. The way I looked at you when I said it. Laura waited. I spent the last 4 months trying to understand how I became someone who could do that to a person who never gave me a reason to." He shook his head slowly. "The closest I can get is, I was so fixated on what I thought I was becoming that I stopped seeing what I had. I used you to define myself. You were the thing in my life that I thought was small, so that I could feel bigger." "I know," she said. "I know you know." He met her eyes. "That's the worst part. You always knew. You just loved me anyway." Laura was quiet for a moment. Not because she didn't know what to say, because she was choosing carefully, the way she had always chosen her words. "I loved the version of you that I believed in," she said. "And I do believe that version of you existed. I think you let it go. Not because of Sabrina. Not because of the promotion. But because somewhere along the way you decided you were the kind of man who needed to diminish things to feel elevated." She folded her hands on the table. "That was your choice. Every single day." Nathan's jaw tightened. Not in anger. In something closer to grief. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I just needed you to know that I see it. All of it." His voice broke, just briefly. "I'm ashamed of who I was in that room." Laura looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you," she said. "I hope you figure out who you want to be." She stood. "The divorce will be finalized in 3 weeks. Oliver handled the settlement fairly. You'll find nothing in there intended to punish you." She moved toward the door. "Take care of yourself, Nathan." She did not look back. She had stopped doing that. Gerald Ashworth's trial began on a gray February morning, and Laura attended only the opening day. She sat in the gallery, quietly, without drawing attention, and watched the man who had once taught her to read a balance sheet the way some people learn to read music sit at the defendant's table in a charcoal suit and stare at the table in front of him. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at her. But when the prosecutor read aloud the core of the government's case, the deliberate, calculated conspiracy to defraud and acquire, Gerald Ashworth's shoulders moved in a way that Laura had only seen once before. At his wife's funeral, 6 years ago, when grief had briefly made him real, she did not feel triumph. She felt the particular sadness of watching someone who had possessed every advantage that character requires: education, experience, resources, relationships, choose, repeatedly and deliberately, to spend those advantages on harm. She left before the morning session ended. Outside on the courthouse steps, Oliver fell into step beside her. "Prosecution feels good about it," he said. "I know." She pulled on her coat against the February wind. "I hope he uses the time to think about what he had." Oliver looked at her with the expression of a man who had known her for 14 years and was still, occasionally, caught off guard by her. "You all right?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Yeah," she said. "I really am." The verdict came 6 weeks later. Guilty on 11 counts. Damian Wolfe had already pled out, 15 years. Sabrina Collins had cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence and left Washington for somewhere she wasn't known, carrying whatever she was going to spend the rest of her life working through. Crestmont Technologies, under new leadership and with Laura more openly involved in its governance, had its strongest quarter in 4 years. The restructuring that had seemed complicated became, in the absence of the corruption draining its resources, almost straightforward. Margaret Sinclair announced she would remain as chairwoman for at least another 3 years. Over lunch one afternoon, she reached across the table and touched Laura's hand. "Your grandmother would have something excellent to say about all of this," she said. Laura smiled. "She'd probably just say I told you so." Margaret laughed, full and warm and unguarded, the way only the very secure can laugh. "She'd be right," she said. 1 year after the night of the gala, Laura's assistant sent her a morning summary that included a short profile of the Eleanor Blackwood Entrepreneurship Initiative, now in its 2nd year. 48 graduates. 7 businesses launched. 2 already profitable. The article quoted one of the program's graduates, a 28-year-old woman from Southeast D.C. named Amara. who said she thought about Laura's words every single day. About not letting the world price you before you've shown them what you're worth. About staying hidden until it's time. Laura read it twice. She closed her laptop. She sat in her office, in the quiet of a Tuesday morning, with the particular light that comes through east-facing windows in October. She thought about being 17 years old at a kitchen table in Baltimore. About her mother's hands. About a cardinal on a bench who had absolutely no doubt about his right to be exactly where he was. She thought about what her grandmother had understood all those years ago, that the deepest kind of wealth is not what you accumulate. It's what you build in other people, what you transfer, what you make possible in someone who hasn't yet discovered what they carry. She picked up her phone and called Denise. "I want to expand to 3 more cities," she said. "And I want to think about an endowment. Something that outlasts both of us." "I've already started the proposal," Denise said. Laura smiled. "Of course you have." She hung up. She went back to work. Here is what Laura Blackwood learned. Not from losing everything, because she never actually lost what mattered, but from watching the people around her make the choices they made. That the hunger for status is a particular kind of poverty. That it hollows a person from the inside in ways that are invisible until they aren't. That Nathan Hart had not been poor in money or talent or opportunity. He had been poor in the belief that who he was would ever be enough, and that poverty had made him do things a truly wealthy person, in the truest sense, would never have considered. That a person like Gerald Ashworth, brilliant, accomplished, positioned, could look at a woman he had genuinely helped shape and see, eventually, only an obstacle. And that this said nothing about the woman and everything about the man he had quietly always been. That character is not a trait you're born with or without. It is 1,000 small decisions made in private, when no one is watching, when there is no audience to perform for, when it would be so much easier to do the other thing. It is who you are in the rooms where it doesn't count, because those rooms are the only rooms that ever really do. Laura Blackwood had been counted out in a ballroom full of people who believed she had nothing to offer, and she had walked back through those same doors as herself. Nothing added, nothing changed, and that had been enough. That had always been enough. It had just taken everyone else a little while to see it. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you. Genuinely. Drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the ballroom? The conversation with Nathan? The grandmother's words? Something else entirely? Because I read every single comment. And hearing what moves you is what keeps these stories coming. If this one found you at the right time, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, now would be a beautiful moment to change that. More stories are coming. The kind that stay with you.